anti-mandate protests around the world have been getting little to no coverage, even though thousands upon thousands have been taking to the streets all across Europe each and every week. On Sunday, a protest in the form of a massive convoy of truckers kicked off in British Columbia with cheering crowds lining the streets and filling up overpasses. It's unknown exactly how many truckers are taking part in this convoy, but the estimated number is 35,000 to 50,000 trucks, with more trucks joining in as the convoy makes its way across Canada. And in many of the towns they pass through, crowds are waiting in sub-zero temperatures cheering them on. The ultimate destination is Ottawa, where the truckers and their supporters intend to protest the Trudeau government over their newly implemented cross-border vaccine mandates. The Canadian cross-border vaccine mandate applies only to truckers who move goods across the U.S.-Canadian border. Truckers who stay inside of Canada are not subject to this. The new rule, which took effect January 15th, requires all truckers be vaccinated or, if Canadian, quarantined for 14 days upon arrival in Canada. If you're not Canadian and not vaccinated, you cannot enter the country. The Canadian government estimates about 10 to 15% of their trucking population is unvaccinated. Of course, now that the definition of what is fully vaccinated could be changed to include boosters, my guess is that number would increase significantly. And that's an important point to remember when looking not only at this protest, but every other anti-mandate protest going on around the world and here in the U.S. People are realizing that even if they were all about getting the vaccine and did their 2 doses and perhaps even vaccinated their kids, they could then be coerced into this new moving of the goalposts to include boosters. And they're not thrilled with that idea. A lot of people who are fully vaccinated are becoming quote unquote anti-vaxxers and joining these protests because they're not willing to be coerced into what could end up being bi or even triannual mandates. The Canadian truckers aren't only protesting the Canadian government's cross-border mandate rule, they're also protesting the U.S.'s same mandate, which prohibits unvaccinated foreign truckers from crossing into the States. The convoy intends to stay in Ottawa until the Canadian government drops the mandate and until the Canadian government asks the U.S. to do the same. Now, what's interesting about this convoy is it's getting hardly any coverage at all inside of Canada or really anywhere. It's a near media blackout, which oddly seems to be the same thing happening in Europe and even here in the States in regards to all of the other protests. There's been some interesting and even eyebrow-raising opposition to the convoy. There's the obvious and blatant media blackout. Some could say the reason the media isn't covering it is because it's small and fringe, but social media users are showing crowds gathered on the streets in nearly every town the truckers roll through and on many of the overpasses in the towns that the truckers pass. Also, the convoy has raised over $5 million through GoFundMe, and I'd say this is not small or fringe, definitely not as small or fringe as the government wants it to be, especially when you're talking about 35 to 50,000 trucks. And of course, there's those looking to demonize and discredit the protest by claiming those who are participating are alt-right or anti-vaxxers. Gerald Butts, the former principal secretary to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, called the group separatists. So now people on social are equating the group to terrorists, which seems to be where we're at these days. Anyone protesting anything at all, be it police brutality, masking kids, election outcomes, and vaccine mandates, is now a radical terrorist in some form. I do want to read part of this statement that was released from the convoy. Quote, "The trucking convoy is not anti-vaccination. It is anti-government mandates. Many of us are vaccinated. We simply believe that every Canadian should be free to choose and face no discrimination or restrictions on their freedom due to their choice. The Canadian Trucking Alliance is a spineless private organization that does not speak for us. No more lockdowns, no forced vaccination. And yes, if it is forced, it is forced when you choose between a shot you don't want and your ability to feed yourself. Truckers will not block emergency vehicles at any point ever and will even assist any person in need at any point in the convoy or protest." We saw this with all of these politicians and people thanking truckers, thanking nurses, thanking all of these frontline workers. And then suddenly, when they don't handle the pandemic the exact way they want, they then say, we got to get rid of these people. They're no good now. Suddenly, the people that risked it, especially in the very beginning of the pandemic, when people didn't fully understand the virus, the hospitals absolutely did not know how to treat it. These frontline workers, these people that were essential workers, I should say, they were braving it while people were at home sipping their coffee, being on Zoom, on Zoom meetings. And how do we thank them, Justin Trudeau? We thank them by saying, get vaccinated or else, which makes no scientific sense anymore at this point. And by the way, I just want to once again reiterate, when the pharmaceutical companies came out with these vaccines, they never tested it for stopping the spread. That was never part of the clinical trials, and they never made those claims. I don't know where those claims came from. It kind of morphed into that because people wanted to end the pandemic so badly. But Big Pharma always said, to their credit, they always said these vaccines are to prevent severe illness and death, hospitalization, bad outcomes. That's all they've ever claimed. And then it kind of morphed into this, no, these vaccines are like measles and polio and smallpox. If you take them, you won't get it. If you take them, we're going to stop spreading it. The whole thing, like, look, there's 35 to 50,000 trucks on the road. American truckers are also joining in. Now, remember, those American truckers, in order for them to go into Canada, they are fully vaccinated. This is not an anti-vaccine rally or convoy. You know, this is anti-mandate. They don't want to be forced into anything. They want freedom. They don't want to have to be checked, their papers or tested.
I see a whole army of my countrymen here in defiance of tyranny.